Perfect. Perfect. So welcome to the second panel of the day. I was just making sure that was working there. Yeah, so really exciting panel that we have here, joined by two really good guests. So firstly, hopefully everyone enjoy the first one. So I'll be moderating it today. So I think I'll just hand it over to Mariela and Zach in terms of introducing themselves. So if Mariela like to go first.
Yeah, no, great. First of all, thanks for inviting me. Also, I have to apologize because I'm in a hotel room at the moment. Hopefully, you can really see the hotel bed behind me. So, yeah, just to introduce myself, my name is Mariela. I am the head of emerging talent at Norwich City Football Club. I work in Norwich the last 5 years. I come from Greece originally. You probably understand from the accent. So I studied sports science and physical education in Athens. I made the trip to the UK in 2014 to Cardiff, actually specifically in Wales, to study performance analysis. So I did my master's there. After a year there, I went to Swansea. This was my first job in professional football in Swansea Football Club. For a year, I did a mix of performance analysis and scouting. I went back to Greece for a few months. I worked for Atromitos, a Greek club in the Super League. And then in 2017, I joined Norwich as a technical scout to begin with. And then, I have undertaken different roles in the club. And now I'm leading the emerging talent scouting.
Great. Thank you very much. No, great story, great background. And Zach?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Charlie, for having me as well. I'm Zach Saucede. I'm the head of analysis and data solutions at Skylab Elite Performance Analysis. And we are a company that helps support teams and organizations with different performance analysis services, from data capture to data science and more, including bespoke software building. And a large focus of my role is to lead on the technical delivery of different projects and innovations that we work on. In terms of my background, I studied sports science university back in 2009 to 2012, did a master's in PA, and then worked across netball, canoe slalom, and then spent 6 years at the LTA working with British tennis players and their coaches before I joined Skylab earlier this year.
Cool. No, great. Thank you very much again. Thank you for both joining us today. So I think just to kind of get more insights into really how football scouting works, how a player goes from club A to club B, and the whole kind of process behind that. So I think a lot of people see the transfer, they see the contract negotiation, they see the shirt like being in the press conference afterwards. But obviously, there's many months of work of data, of insights. Going to see the player many times, watch just how that whole process works. So I guess it would just be interesting, just Mariela, to hear just from a club perspective, how kind of like do you identify the players first? Is it like, how does that process work? Where does it really start?
Yeah, no, as you said, like it doesn't start like 1 month before the transfer window, of course, and it doesn't stop as well when the transfer window or after the transfer window. It's a work of like scouting never stops. It's a 12-month, 24 hours a day as well. So what we're trying to do is, we're trying to really divide the year. So of course, the first month of the season is the identification stage, I would say. So we're trying to watch as many games as we can, as many players as we can in specific territories. So I guess every club has different, depending on their needs and also their resources. And then after that, we are trying from November, December, we're trying a little bit to be more targeted. We're trying to, we know, of course, the players that we're interested, or the players that we know we have some, we have identified as potential interesting players. Then, we're trying to really watch them live. We try to analyze as well a lot on video using a lot of data. to support our opinion as well, and then we're just we take it from there. But it's not working like that every time. Okay, this is the process, but of course, a lot of times we might identify a player first through data. We use a lot of data, especially to identify in our club, at least the players. We find that it's a very good way of filtering down. Because of course, like, we live in a world with a lot of information, a lot of players now. It's not like before. We with one button in Y Scout, in Insta Scout, wherever, like we can I don't know what's players in Chile, but there's so many players. So we're trying a little bit, especially in the leagues that we consider as secondary leagues for us. We are trying to use data a lot to identify the players that are interesting for us to start scouting. So yeah, the process is more or less like that. Of course, we are traveling a lot now after 2 years almost. Again, in the youth tournaments is very important. Yeah, it's actually working like that. But as probably as from the agent perspective, there are a lot of things that you have to adapt during the process.
Yeah, definitely. It's not something which is black and white. It doesn't work the same every time, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's an interesting point there, and Zach, I don't know if you kind of see this as well in some of the work that you guys do. So do mostly clubs use kind of like because obviously there's been such an enormous rise in technology and data and the insights and information now that you can get, as you said, on players all halfway across the world is incredible. Is it often the case that clubs kind of they use data and they use tech to kind of narrow down the pool and then send scouts to see the players? Is that generally in your experience, is that how the clubs kind of use some of the data and how you work with them, or is it more like a combined approach?
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a hybrid. There's value from both physical scouting and digital scouting in terms of using data and video, and so you want to bring everyone together to be able to give a really clear picture as to the players that you want to recruit, because ultimately you want to mitigate the risks when you bring a player into the club. So using technology and how that's advanced is significant. A scout will have a recruitment analyst, video and data, and all the technologies to help support them and to streamline exactly what they're doing, so that they're able to apply their expertise. So if it means that the data can allow a scout to go and see 6 matches of 6 players rather than seeing 2 matches of 20 players in a period of time, then you're able to be a lot more efficient and you can glean more value out of that expert scout, which is more beneficial to the club when it comes to making a decision on players.
No, exactly, and no, very interesting. And how, do you see any benefits? Like, is there anything that kind of like the data like misses out? Is there anything that you have to get from watching a player versus like watching a player live in the flesh versus rather than all kind of the different platforms and analysis you can get? Like, what is it that physical scouting gives that like just doing it purely from a screen doesn't?
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I think there is a big debate on that in general, but I think I agree with Zach what he said, that you need to have a combined approach to get the value out of both, I think, in my opinion. And so we have to define a little bit what is scouting, because we have scouting as watching the players. I think nowadays, if we think about scouting, it's a lot more complicated. And I think a scout, of course, you need to have the basic knowledge. You have to understand the game. You have to be able to identify the right player for the club. And it's important what I said, like the right player, not the best player. I think if we go everyone to watch a game, probably we will identify the best player. I don't think it's that difficult. The player that really stands out in the pitch. But from your club perspective, we are always talking and speaking in our club, this is a good player but not for us. So this is important to really know to identify the right player. But I think a scout nowadays is very important to be able to communicate, to network, to find the information. So all these things is difficult. They're very difficult to do when you're sitting in front of your computer. Of course, you can search in the internet, yes, 100%, but this, direct communication with other scouts, other professionals, other agents, it's very difficult to do it when you're watching a game on TV or from video. And then speaking about data, I think, a lot of people, they say, that the data lie, the numbers lie, and all these kind of things. Again, it's not an approach I agree, because, data are facts. So if someone, if the data shows that, I don't know, this team has made 10 shots and this team has made 2 shots, then that's not a lie, that's true, it's a fact. So the most important is how you actually translate the data and how we use them and where we actually use them. So they're not the numbers that are lie, are actually the people. So if you ask the wrong questions, I think you just get the wrong answers. So that's how I see it. So as Zach said, the most important is to know how to use the data and try to combine both to get the best out of it.
Yeah, I guess having the data is one thing, but being able to what you glean and what you take from the data, that's where the human side comes into it, right? And you can make the numbers, having the more the numbers is the better, but you can make the numbers what you want the numbers to say. I guess it's about the analysis and what you take from that, definitely. That's really interesting. And like one other thing I was thinking about is how do say you're scouting a player from a completely different league, different country, different style of football. How does, from both like the physical and like the digital side of things, how do you take that into consideration? There might be a really say the club's looking for a right back, really great right back, exactly kind of like the player you want. But how do you reconcile kind of the idea of like a different formation or a different tactical approach if there's a team that perhaps they're in a league where they're one of the best teams and they go into a much more difficult division where the team has less possession? How does that kind of like that process work? How does it kind of translate from going from one team and one style of football to a different one?
Well, that's a good question, because it's a question that I don't have the answer, unfortunately. We're really working on that, but it's not easy to do it really from the data perspective. Maybe Zach has a better solution on that. But it's difficult. At the moment, we're trying to use physical data. I think you mentioned and are important. And I think the physical data, especially like, I don't know, intense runs, you can translate from one league to the other. But a few of the technical characteristics or is tactical is very difficult, because of course the tempo, as you said, is different a lot of times, and the formation. It's a lot easier for us, for example, to identify it's easier in the eye to identify a player that is suitable for our club when the other club plays a similar style of football. So this is the easiest thing to do. So at the moment, I would say that it's a lot down to experience, knowing the levels. And I think this is very important. And from the data perspective, we're really trying to work on this. Okay, we have created some algorithms to try to a little bit weigh, if I can say like that, the strength of the league. But yeah, it's difficult. We don't really rely only onto that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'd add to that actually, that there's, you've got tools like AI Abacus, who are putting out content showing that there's differences in the leagues in terms of the performance levels. And this is something that more broadly clubs can utilize in terms of understanding the type of player that they want to go and recruit. As Mariela said, you want to have it's natural to look at clubs that are playing with a similar formation or game style, and that's really important for any club that they recruit based on their game model and how they what are their coaching philosophies, how do they want to play generally. So you've got the team playing style, and then you've got what are the specific players that you're targeting, and the attributes that you want to get from that player. And so there's quite an array of ways in which you can narrow that down from certain leagues, feeder clubs, and then addressing like the players and how they perform individually and whether they can adapt quite nicely into that particular team that you're working for.
think we might have just lost Mariela there to the
the
internet. But we'll wait for. No, it's fine. She'll come back, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So when you kind of supply clubs with information and data, what are you actually supplying them with? Like, with XG, or like are those kind of like empties? Like, what kind of analysis then do you provide them, or is that something the club does kind of their own due diligence on, or what kind of are you like discussing and providing them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like, specifically from our position as a company, we're not doing the sort of the day-to-day of recruitment. That's something that we can do, and we collaborate with in these areas, but we're not doing the day-to-day in the same way in which Mariela would do within a club, where like that's her sole purpose of focusing on recruitment. But I mean, you mentioned there about like expected goals or expected threats, and these are metrics that are used, calculations that help to understand both a player and a team performance, and these help to kind of give a lot more detail beyond the top level statistics of like goals, number of passes, attempts on goal, which don't give much value to the players that contribute to the success of scoring, for example. And these kinds of metrics can certainly help to add value to a player within the market, because you can help to understand, like, is a player with using these metrics, is a player outperforming their playing position or their team, or like within their league. Maybe you've got a player who's in the Championship who's performing at the level that you see in the Premier League, or you could use this to try and from a football agent's perspective. If you have a player that's performing really well and you see that there are gaps in a team where they're underperforming in particular areas, then you're able to highlight this value. So there's a lot of importance on these kinds of metrics, but it's probably worth noting that when you're talking about things like expected goals or assists or threats, that these calculations they're not standardized across the sport. Each club will have their own weighting on the specific elements that create that calculation and that model. And so it's important for an agent to recognize, like, how is a football club set up, and whether or not a player can fit into that club's playing style. And you can use these metrics to help like underpin that, and show that player brings value to that team.
Yeah, I think probably one of the most kind of frustrating things for people working inside football clubs, whether that be recruitment or scouting or sporting directors, is when agents probably come with a player that doesn't fit the style of football at all, doesn't fit the manager preferences, it's not the position they need, it's completely the wrong player. And I think a lot of agents go to clubs with completely the wrong fit. So I guess it's one thing that for agents really as well, you need to know firstly the position the clubs are looking for, but you really need to understand, and that's where kind of the understanding of football and kind of really the nuances of what happens on the pitch, to understand how the club works, in terms of how the manager style is, what formation, how they're playing, the tempo, all these things before offering a player there, because obviously you don't want to offer a player that really doesn't have a chance to get in the squad, or it isn't what they're looking for. And that's kind of leads on to another question. Is it frustrating, Mariela, well, not frustrating per se, but when I've seen it so many times when the influence of agents and outside sources on the recruitment of a club. So you have one player does quite well at the club perhaps, and then the same agent will have 2, 3, 4 players inside the team. Obviously, it doesn't happen all the time. There's a few examples, throughout football that does happen. But often are clubs told to scout certain players, or like, is that a difficult one to sometimes reconcile when the manager wants a certain player, but say the scouting department doesn't, or how kind of the different departments talk to each other? If the scout doesn't really think it's a good fit, but the manager's had previous success with the player at a different club, how does that all kind of fit in?
Yeah. First of all, sorry, I missed a few parts.
No,
maybe the network is not great, but I think I understood what you're asking. So yeah, I mean, well, I think it's it's happening. We can't really hide that it's not happening in professional football, unfortunately. I mean, I think I'm quite lucky that I haven't really experienced it myself at the moment, but of course I have, I have heard from others, like speaking and, talking and exchanging experiences. I think, it's very difficult to really handle it sometimes, because politics exist, and that's not only football. Football is like just a small picture of the society in general. So it's happening. In terms of what you said about the, I mean, actually, I want to say that it's not always bad. If you have a good relation with an agent and you feel that you can work well with him, then it's only fair that sometimes you want to do more business with this agent, and it doesn't have to be every time something that is happening between the team and the agent, because I guess we all want to work with people that we trust in general, and that's happening in every business, I guess. Now, in terms of the coach, I think this is the part I miss. But if you ask in terms of, like, sometimes the coach have worked with a player and he wants the player in the team, I think that recruitment and scouting, and actually a player, because we transfer actually not only a player, we transfer a human being. For this to work, there's always, of course, a risk involved because he's a person. But I think everyone has to agree in the end. Of course, for example, in Norwich, as a scouting department, we do all the work, and the head coach comes in the end of the process, but has a big say in the decision making. Our job is to provide the options and that we are happy with, and then in the end, if the head coach is not happy with one player and is happy with the second one, for example, then we have to go with that. Because if in the end of the day, he needs to play this player for this transfer to be successful.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I thought I mentioned here that if anyone has any questions, just do put them in the chat, and I can ask them. There's a few questions coming in. Actually, one that I was about to ask from Branko, so he read my mind. But his question was, how do you measure the soft facts, for example, mental characteristics of a player, to to be able to, if that player might fit in as a human being? I think, Mariela, you touched on it there. You can have all kind of the data, all the insights, and the player might, all the physical scouting, but if the player can't speak the language, or if they get homesick, or all these different elements that you can't really account for. But when you're signing a player for millions and millions, it's people don't realize these are business assets at the end of the day, and assets that you hope have a return on investment. And when you're dealing with people, it's always unreliable. So really, how do clubs kind of factor in that? And so anything you do, some Zach as well, so feel free to, is there anything from the how the data can help, or is that something is it just down to luck, really?
Yeah, sorry, Zach.
So you good?
So as a club, I think in general clubs, they're not doing that well. That's my opinion, and it's something that we need to improve. And especially in Norwich, we are trying to really do a lot better. I think it's good to have a good environment, of course. But what we are trying to do is, of course, knowing the person before comes, because it's really important for us to know the family, to know the background, where the player comes from, like you said about the language. But I think where a lot of clubs is a missing piece that a lot of clubs, they don't do well, is that when the player is there, how you help him really adapt. Because of course, a lot of all of the clubs, especially in the Premier League, they have player care manager that is trying to really help the players to adapt. But I think we're talking a lot, especially in Norwich now, because we invest a lot in South America, and we say, if we invest in a market, for example, then when a player comes, especially from a completely different continent, to come to England, then we really have to invest on this player adapting as well. To have people that speak the language, speak Spanish, trying to help these players, which they're not used in a different way of life. And for me, being from a different country, I can see it myself, how difficult it is, especially in the beginning, to adapt in a new culture. Different weather, different food, everything different. So, it's something that we really trying to improve.
Yeah, I'd say it's also good to see what's happening within a team as well. So like as Mariela said about people coming from different cultures, if you have people that are in your team already, whether that's staff or players, that can be a huge benefit. So you can look internally before then sort of like understanding this wider picture of whether a player will fit within that team culture, because it's a huge element of the game, both on and off the pitch. And I saw Branko's question as well about like the soft facts, and he echoed about the mental characteristics as well. And I think this is an interesting area, because the data that's provided within football is on the pitch, very outcome based. Doesn't necessarily address some of the areas like cognitive ability. So how well can a player concentrate or make decisions or pay attention, or what's their peripheral vision like? And these are things that are very difficult to quantify at the moment. And that's certainly where, like, as we talked at the beginning about physical scouting, where there's a huge amount of value from a physical scout, like from a person being able to see these things that are not using data to drive the decision making. Like they'll pick up on cues that they will see that you can't get from watching match footage or collecting data within a game. How does a player respond to certain situations? What are they like during the warm-ups? How do they interact with their with their teammates? These are all things that feed into that, that helps to kind of facilitate that decision when you're recruiting a player. And from a data perspective, it's definitely a blind spot, and you kind of plug those gaps with your expert scouts. But it'd be a really interesting area to see where technology can be applied to this, because it's just not there at the moment. So you've got to find other ways to address this.
Yeah, I guess it's a difficult one for the technology to help with, because obviously you'd need access to that, because every individual is different. You'd almost need access to the player directly, to almost like, obviously the players take medicals when they come, but you almost need as well as a physical medical, you almost need like a mental medical as well, I think, because again, like I feel like you need to make sure the players in the right mindset to be able to, especially when you go to a big club or the Premier League, the pressure I'm sure is absolutely it's crazily intense. So not every player deals with that or can deal with that at that age, for example. So it's a real difficult one. I think just a question for Zach here as well, about kind of managers and team selection and how data kind of infiltrates that. So we're, as Raza said, we're increasingly seeing managers who perform poorly going to clubs that fit their system, but also performing incredibly, and vice versa. With that in mind, does managers and coaches selection have the same rigorous consideration of data as player selection? If not, should it?
I mean, I can't speak for like I'm not someone that's in the decision making process of hiring and moving on managers, but in terms of assessing managers' abilities and how they play and their experience and what they bring to a team, it's definitely something that is considered. I mean, the data is not going to be the same as players, of course, but there's plenty of information that you can glean from the results of the clubs in which they've managed that can kind of guide, like, is this manager a good fit? And I think more broadly, there's probably a bit of a shift in the structure of football clubs as well, where typically a manager will come in and they will direct everything in the club as to like how they're playing, like from first team down through the academies. And then as a new manager comes in, then it's like rip it all up and start again. And I think there's a shift in roles like sporting directors or football directors who are starting to build an ethos and a way of working that means that they're able to bring in a manager that fits the club much more closely, and there's a lot more longevity in what they can produce as a club and the performances on the field because they have that consistency. So I think there's a shift in how football clubs are structured, and then therefore how managers are brought into a club and what they bring to that setup. The data's not the same as players, but certainly like there's a lot of information to be had that helps that decision making.
Really interesting. And another question here from Raphael that I guess kind of crosses both of you guys is how can data be used when promoting youth players? And a Norwich specific example here, such as Max Aarons, who had no first team experience compared to players who have already had lots of first team experience elsewhere, and therefore has a richer data set. So I guess just generally, how can kind of like the scouting of youth players, when obviously there isn't that level of data that, you know, having scouting a player from Serie A or La Liga or the Premier League, for example, how do you kind of reconcile that, you know, from especially with the youth?
Yeah, in the youth is more difficult, of course, because the less data, the less the confidence probably on using the data. So, you know, again, you're trying to use all the resources you have to support your opinion. I think that's how we actually use data in the youth ages, in the young ages. But then also what we're trying to create sometimes is, and again, it's difficult. We don't really we don't rely only on that. Is we try to create benchmarks and maybe measure the career. Like we give young players career points, for example, depending on, you know, maybe how many minutes they have played in this stage of their career, compared maybe to someone that has already, you know, reached the professional level. So we're trying to create a model for that as well.
And I know you said before we actually got on the call, so you're at a youth tournament now. What when it's younger players, does that differ when you go to watch kind of, you know, a 23, 24, 25-year-old? How does that differ? And what obviously you're looking for, I guess, the potential, but how do you actually, what are you actually looking for in that sense? Hopefully I'm not trying to ask you to give the game away here, but what type of things is it different when you're watching like a more established league?
Yeah, well, it is different. It's not a secret, really. I think all the clubs are looking for like similar things in general. I think depends. For example, when you're working in England, you know, a certain level of physicality, unfortunately, it is required, or intensity, I would say. So I think scouts are seeing differently depending the league. More technical leagues like Spain, for example, then you can maybe, you know, the balance is a little bit in, and we are saying, you know, very good player, but probably is not going to be able to play in England, unfortunately. So there's a lot of things like that. Now, I think the most important, and that's my personal view on that, is the game understanding.
Yeah, definitely.
What I'm really looking, especially in.
So I think connection might have broken up there. Sorry. And then I think just thank you for that answer, Mariela. And the question to Zach as well, from David Jacobs, with the GB point system, there's now more emphasis on non-league football. How is tech dealing with identifying those players? You see lots of success stories now of players coming from, you know, Jamie Vardy's the go-to example, right? Going from non-league to Premier League champion. How kind of you guys addressing kind of like the ever-growing demand from clubs to get bargains, I guess, rather than going for expensive signings? How are you guys addressing that?
Yeah, I mean the GB like the regulations have certainly put restrictions on like the player pools like that are available. I think I read something that it's reduced the market pool of like 60,000 players from Europe down to about 3,000 to 4,000, and so you naturally have to look at other areas in which you can recruit players. So yeah, I mean the data that's available across the different leagues, going down the tiers, is something that's just going to feed into your recruitment model and how you then target those players. It's no different in terms of the process.
Yeah. And is that a thing you're seeing, Mariela, as well, after, you know, living in kind of this post-Brexit UK? Are clubs shifting more of a focus towards kind of domestic scouting, or is there still kind of the same level of emphasis, you know, to go to recruit players from other countries? Has there been any change or no change at all?
Yeah, no, there is a change for sure. Like we have to adapt, but we are trying to think more positively. You know, we're trying to see the opportunity that this creates rather than the negatives. Because yeah, of course there are. I mean, we don't want to talk about Brexit in general now, but just in football. But yeah, of course there are like less opportunities from Europe. I think that's this is obvious. We can actually see it, but then we are trying to really try to be maybe more open-minded on that. Of course, there are other markets that we have to invest more. For example, it's easier maybe now to recruit from South America, where before the players, they needed to have the European passport, where now that's not needed. And also some of the leagues there are higher in the bands, so more points for the players and able to come to England. But also we're trying as well, you know, it's important to take advantage of the rule that says that when the player is under 21, then the clubs, they can appeal. So I think this is also important for the clubs in the UK to really think about it and try to be creative in the way they scout.
No, definitely. I think it's going to be. I think all of football, I guess, we'll kind of see in the next windows how it does affect, if it does affect at all, especially exactly. Coming and going from the clubs.
And I think sorry, Charlie, on that you mentioned that, you know, that doesn't influence only England, that influence really the whole world of football. And I think if I don't know, but how I see it is that a lot of the leagues, and for example Turkey is one of those because they're quite high in the band. I think clubs, if they start thinking smartly, they will try to play more young players, because it's easier for now all the English clubs are trying. They will actually look there. So from these leagues, it's an opportunity as well to create value.
I think one trend we've seen kind of grow over the last few, maybe 3-4 years, actually some of the, I hear all the time that a lot of the German scouts and the German recruitment is really, really strong. I'm not sure why, maybe you know why, but are you seeing a real trend of a lot of the young English players going to Germany, being really successful, then coming back or staying or going for huge fees? Are these kind of like feeder kind of countries? What is your take on that, and how kind of has that changed, or what's the perspective there? So I think it's interesting from agents. They see if they have a really good young player, they're not quite in kind of like getting into the first team, or you know, they're kind of stuck in the academy setup. How do you see kind of these moves to countries like Germany, where they really try to develop youth? How do you kind of see that?
Yeah, I think Germany is right. The good thing in Germany, I mean, you know, the positive anyway from the scouting perspective, is that they don't have any rules in terms, especially in the first division. Actually, in the first division, I'm speaking about Bundesliga now, in terms of like recruits from everywhere, and this is already gives you like advantage compared to other clubs, maybe say in UK or even.
I think might have maybe the hotel Wi-Fi's dropped again.
Yeah. Ooh. I can expand on that though whilst we wait for Mariela to come back. I think it's a really good point about the Bundesliga clubs looking to take players from the English academy, English teams and their academies, and they're able to make an immediate impact into the senior league. And that's a benefit for them in terms of the league and that club that they're moving to, but also for the club that's loaning out that player, because they're able to make really good decisions about how do they develop this player to then loan them out and bring them back into the Premier League or whatever club that they're or league that they're working within. So there's a good trade in that sense of identifying, like, what's the traits of a league and where are they adopting different players from different places and at what level. So there's a lot of value in that as well.
I think the Wi-Fi dropped for you, Mariela. So feel free to. I'm not sure where you stopped, but feel free to carry on.
Yeah, no worries. It's never easy to do it in a hotel. Never the Wi-Fi stable. No, I think I don't know where until when you actually. But no, I said that because you said about Germany that there's already an advantage in scouting because the German clubs they can recruit from everywhere. So I think from the scouting perspective, this is very, very interesting. But in terms of the young players now going to Germany or maybe in other leagues that they can develop, we see a trend in England now. The English players they have to stay until they are 18 anyway. Also, they are not considered anymore EU, so it's going to be a bit more difficult for some other leagues, not in Germany, because in Germany they don't have this rule. But yeah, it's I think in England the problem is that it's difficult to play in the Premier League because it's such a competitive league, and a lot of clubs they don't really invest on that. And having the under-23s league, the Premier League 2, doesn't really help because the players they really need to get exposed in senior football. Loan pathways, of course, help on that, but it's not always easy. And I can see this trend, especially when, for example, now I'm watching youth tournaments. You're watching players from France, from the Netherlands, from Belgium, players that the English players that we see them and we can see the potential, but then when they play against some of the other nations like France, for example, they're always, you can see the difference in the intensity, and that's a problem because usually a lot of the French players that are already play Ligue 1, Ligue 2 in their league, and they are exposed in a different intensity, in a different tempo. So yeah, I think I can see this trend happening more and more with players trying to go abroad to get this exposure, and then maybe they come back after.
Yeah, I think that's definitely where the business of football comes into it as well, because everyone wants to, everyone sees the Premier League as the best league in the world, and people want the superstars and the biggest names, which unfortunately they aren't. 17, 18-year-olds. They're the people that are the players that are already global superstars, and that's why the Premier League is so big, I guess. But at the same time, from the business perspective, it's if you're a German club and you sign like a Jadon Sancho and then you sell him for 70, 80 million after signing for a relatively small fee, that's the business. That's where football comes. That's where football becomes business and about the financials, I guess, and how it all comes together. I'm not sure if Mariela might frozen. We've got time for maybe one more question. There's quite a few. I'm just trying to find a good one to end it on. But I think just generally that, maybe because Mariela's frozen, what kind of like the if there's any kind of like advice and like one thing that I guess people don't quite know about kind of scouting or where you think it might be going, just any kind of like closing remarks on kind of like the industry and where you can kind of see it in the next few years.
Yeah, I guess what's really important for people who are working in football agency is to understand what it is that clubs are trying to do with data. I mean, as I said at the top of this this conversation, ultimately what they're trying to do is bring in loads of information, whether that's from the scouting or the data or whatever else, to mitigate the risk. And that's both in terms of, they want to have a successful transfer so that the player is successful in them playing within the team, but then there's also a financial element as well in terms of, a return on their investment. Do they get their value for the money that they're paying? And so it's really important for football agents to be aware of this, and to dig a little bit deeper into what are the game models and the playing styles of different teams, to kind of make your time more efficient in terms of bringing players to that club, and to try and get to grips with the types of metrics that that you see in the media that clubs are trying to use to calculate the effectiveness of a player and whether they will fit into a team. And this will just like this will make things more efficient for that football agent, because you want to get the best for your player, helps with negotiations. And I know, like in the previous conversation, Erkut said about like a football player's career is about 5 to 7 years of about peak performance, and you're guiding them through most of their career. And so you really want to be like hot on your toes of like how you're recognized in different clubs, how they're playing, how they're recruiting, and how you can use data to leverage like your negotiations. That would certainly be something I would target.
Thank you. No, appreciate that. And Maria, just to close as well, if there's any kind of like final remarks or advice or anything interesting where you can see kind of like the industry going and scouting and how it's interacting with agents, and just generally, if any kind of closing remarks or things to add.
Yeah, no, I like what Zach said actually now in the end, and I think this is very important from the agent perspective. I think it's very important to, I think as an agent, of course as a scout as well, but as an agent to, I think you actually touched on that, Charlie, in the beginning, to know the club, to know the culture, to know the market, to know how people operate inside the club. I think you have to invest. Yes, you have to invest on studying the actual squad, but you have to invest in the background a lot, in the relationship, and I think that's at least how I see it and how it works better for me. But I see this being the most important thing in the relationship between clubs and agents.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much both for the time today. Really appreciate it. It was really interesting. I'm sure everyone found it interesting as I did as well. So thank you very much for joining us. I enjoy the rest of the trip in Spain, Mariela, and appreciate battling through the hotel Wi-Fi and joining us from abroad. And Zach as well, thank you for giving up time on Saturday as well. But no, I hope everyone found that really interesting. There's a short break now until 11, where it's like a networking hour where you can speak to other attendees, speakers. So feel free to utilize that. But once again, thank you very much to you both for joining us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, Charlie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariela.
Thanks, Jeff.